This is Writers and Company. Today, one of England's most stylish and controversial writers, Martin Amis. His new novel, The Zone of Interest, revisits the Holocaust from a different angle. Martin Amis has had a kind of rock star reputation in the English literary world. Whatever he does becomes news, quite apart from his writing. At the same time, he's been hailed as the cleverest and most entertaining writer of his generation. As Sam Leith in The Guardian recently observed, unlike some of his peers, there's something unmistakable about Amis's style. A paragraph of Amis, a sentence of Amis, always sounds like Amis. Martin Amis wrote his first novel when he was only 24, a couple of years after getting a first-class degree from Oxford, like his father, novelist and poet Kingsley Amis. Martin's early books were raucous novels about adolescent sex, drugs, and communal living. Then he took on class, nuclear weapons, and environmental collapse. And in 1991 he wrote Time's Arrow, a slender but ambitious book tracing the life of a Nazi doctor backwards through the century, reversing Time's arrow. It's intense, inexorable, and dark. But soon Amis came back with renewed ebullience, with a big comic novel called The Information, about literary envy and the male midlife crisis. But Martin Amis is a satirist, which means he's serious about his laughter. He's also become more frontally serious about his subjects, writing about his obsession with the terrors of the Soviet Union under Stalin. First in a nonfiction book, Koba the Dread, subtitled Laughter and the 20 Million, and then in a novel about the Gulag called House of Meetings. Martin Amis's last novel, Lionel Asbo, returned to comic form in a self-described Dickensian work. It also picks up Amis's preoccupation with the criminal demimonde, focusing on a thug who wins $1 gazillion in the lottery while serving time in prison. Subtitled State of England, it came out just as Amis was moving to the U.S. Now in his new novel, his 14th, The Zone of Interest, he returns to a dark subject, the world of the Nazi Holocaust. Martin Amis spoke to me from the CBC's New York studio. When we first spoke more than 20 years ago, it was about your book, Time's Arrow, which recounts the experience of a Nazi doctor. Why did you want to return to the subject of the Holocaust in your new novel, The Zone of Interest?
Well, you don't decide. You take the promptings of the unconscious, is what you do. An idea for a work of fiction will come at you like a sort of shimmer, like a frisson. And you sit up and you think, I can write a novel about this, or a story, or a novella. You don't know the length, but you know that you've got started. And what came to me, the donné, was the idea of a sort of love at first sight moment with this horribly anomalous background, which was a concentration camp, never named, but is obviously Auschwitz.
And from there, I mean, it's such a demanding undertaking in terms of, I mean, I can see just in the acknowledgments at the end of the novel, shelf loads of books and just to reimagine yourself in that world.
Yes, well, it wasn't so difficult to write as Time's Arrow, because I did all my suffering then, really. You have to sort of earn the novel, and the more terrifying the subject, then the more the earning process goes on. But I'd done most of the emotional work way back then, and continued to do it, because I've never left the subject alone, and I haven't left it alone since finishing this book either.
Why do you think that is?
It's that remark of Michael Andre Bernstein, poet and academic and novelist, late. He died about 10 years ago, I think. He said that our understanding of the genocide, this genocide, is central to our self-understanding. And that is why it's a never-ending process. The other thing, of course, is that no one understands Hitler. An amazing fact by itself that no historian claims to be baffled by Stalin. Stalin is very assimilable. He makes sense in a way that Hitler doesn't begin to do. And there's not one historian who claims that he isn't baffled by Hitler. So, and no one knows why he did it, what his motive was. Huge questions that have no chance, I think, of being answered now. So that allows the novelist or the poet, as well as the historian, to keep on exploring it.
And do you think that's the case when you say understanding that genocide is central to our self-understanding?
Yes. I mean, and not everyone's going to feel that way, although I love the casual aside from W.G. Sebald, who said that no serious person ever thinks about anything else. I mean, we do think about other things, but it's always there.
Well, he was German and he was born in 1944, so I think it might be another reason that Sebald felt haunted by that subject.
Well, I know quite a few people who are, and correspond with, their friends, close friends, who their minds can't leave it alone.
When you talk about understanding, it seems that is something that eludes us when it comes to the Holocaust.
Yes, well, what sort of liberated me, I think, was reading some remarks by Primo Levi, who is the great visionary of the whole phenomenon, where he said that he was answering questions that were frequently put to him in print. And he was asked, how do you explain the Nazi hatred? And he says, well, he lists the usual reasons that historians give, and says, but he finds these reasons not commensurate, these explanations not commensurate with the facts that need explaining. And then he says, perhaps we must not understand it, because to understand something is to contain it and to include it within yourself, and almost to identify with people who can't be identified with. And he said this should give us comfort, because it shows that the hatred was anti-human, even counter-human, he said. It is a hatred that is not in us, it is outside man. And what he does there is remove the pressure to understand. And I found I almost sort of cried out with relief and a kind of epiphany when I read those words. And then I felt more able to go in there myself.
But when you quote Michael Andre Bernstein with the idea of it being central to our self-understanding, what has that enabled you to understand about yourself?
Well, I was struggling with trying to penetrate it, and I reread a book, The Holocaust, Martin Gilbert, that I'd read before I wrote Times Arrow in the late 80s. And I was almost making the same marks in the margin that I'd done the first time round. And I just couldn't see what they thought they were doing. I was sort of cursing myself for not having made any progress whatever about it. But I think that defines the singularity, the exceptionalism of the Holocaust, is that it is so impenetrable. And a friend of mine, Clive James, the writer Clive James, says that, we struggle with this question, but you feel it's the best part of you that's struggling with it. You're confronting the terminal point of human evil thus far. And you're rather like, I feel, that writers, including historians, are like plane crash investigators. You go to the site and you begin your scrutiny, and by the time you're done, and it may take years, you can say with confidence that planes will crash in future, but not for that reason, not in those circumstances. So you're building up an immunity to this kind of hatred, which never goes away. And anti-Semitism is fascinatingly unique, and we see it building up again in Europe as we speak. And it's not like other racial hatreds in that no one thinks that black people or control the world, control Wall Street and the Bourse and the Bank of England. it's sort of magical thinking. It's hallucinatory anti-Semitism, unlike the other hatreds.
When you say, quoting Clive James, that it's a you're the better for it for trying to engage with it as a subject.
Well, not quite that, but it's the best part of you that is engaging with it.
Is that the part of the self that's understanding that you're gaining?
Yes, that it's your conscience and your pity and your terror, all the tragic emotions that are purged in the process of catharsis. That's why after every performance of King Lear, there isn't a Jonestown of suicides, because art doesn't work like that. It's you come out of King Lear invigorated, even though it's as bleak as anything could be. And
I mean, obviously there have been many mass killings in the 20th century, from Cambodia to Rwanda. And you yourself have written about the Soviet Gulag and Stalin's de facto mass murders of through famine and executions and trials and so on.
And slavery. I mean, the Gulag was a slave system.
And yet, what makes this Nazi exceptionalism is its unfathomableness? You think the others are more explicable?
Well, yes, and I think that's one of the elements. It's unfathomable, but it also sprang out of the heart of Europe. It had no Asiatic element, although it was leaning very much towards the East rather than towards the West in the 30s and 20s. The West was civilization, the East was culture. And D.H. Lawrence saw all this coming in 1928, extraordinary piece of writing, where he said, they're tending now to the East. All that compromise with democracy is over. They're meeting their destiny with Tartary, whence Attila the Hun came. So we have to accept that Germany was the best educated nation there'd ever been when Hitler took power. So that's certainly an element of the singularity. Another one is how incredibly hypocritical and disgusting and shot through with deception the whole project was, and how avaricious it was. It was meant to be self-financing, the plundering of the Jews, and then the use of their bodies, every inch of their bodies. All they didn't do to them was eat them. And, you know, the deception right up to the moment of killing, where the commandant would greet the new deportees by saying, you know, you're here to work, I'm not going to deceive you, you're going to be working the farms, the food is plain but plentiful, and we're going to have a light disinfection now after your difficult journey, and any diabetics and those with special dietary needs, please contact Dr. Bodman at the Traveller's Lodge after supper. And the whole transport would be dead in an hour. The lying and the greed and defaces the Nazi project in a way that the other great killings of the century aren't tarred with that brush.
Your novel, The Zone of Interest, is largely written from the perspective of two German officers, and one of them is the commander of the camp, Paul Dahl, and he oversees the arrival of the prisoners, and as you say, he tells them all sorts of things that aren't the case at all.